The smoke behind the station had started on a quiet Sunday afternoon in a small town nestled between the hills and the sea. Nothing seemed out of place. Families were out for lunch, kids rode bicycles down the sidewalks, and the breeze carried the scent of jasmine and barbecue. But near the back parking lot of the local police station, where the sun beat hard on the cracked asphalt, smoke began to rise. And no one knew yet, but that smoke was about to change everything. Keanu had come to this town for silence, not attention. He had rented a modest cabin 2 miles outside the city limits, a wooden shelter surrounded by pine trees, a place where even the birds sang like they knew how to whisper. He came here after wrapping up a long film, hoping to reconnect with something. Real people, peace, and maybe even pain. He didn't bring an entourage, no flashy cars, just his motorcycle, a duffel bag, and the kind of weariness that doesn't show on camera but lives deep inside a man's bones. He had parked his custom-built motorcycle, a vintage black and silver beast, by the sidewalk while he picked up some groceries and stopped at a nearby shelter to drop off donations. It wasn't much, just canned food, clothes, and some blankets, but the volunteers had nearly cried when he handed them the bag. He didn't tell them who he was. He just smiled, said, "Hope this helps," and turned to leave. He was halfway, back to the street when he heard shouting. A group of officers stood near his bike, one of them pointing and laughing, another filming it with his phone. Keanu's heart sank, not because they recognized him, but because he already knew what was coming. He had seen the same energy before, mockery mixed with power, men trying to feel bigger by tearing someone else down. One officer kicked the side of the motorcycle, sneering, "Whose junk is this?" Another smirked and said, "Probably some vagrant trying to look cool." Then came the most chilling part. One of them lit a match. Keanu froze for a second. His instinct was to shout, to run, but something made him hold still. He watched in disbelief as the flame touched the fabric of a nearby rag, and in moments the fire licked up the leather seat, crawling toward the tank. A small explosion popped. Passers-by screamed. Smoke burst into the sky like a signal flare. Keanu ran forward, but the officers stopped him. "Back off," one barked. "We're handling it." "That's my bike," Keanu said, breath catching in his throat. "Yeah?" the officer said, sneering. "Prove it." The fire engine arrived, but it was too late. The motorcycle was a skeleton. Charred metal, blackened rubber. Nothing left. Keanu stood there, his face unreadable, while the crowd gathered behind him. Someone whispered, "Isn't that—" But Keanu didn't turn around. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. Instead, he took a deep breath, turned to the officers and said in a calm, quiet voice, "You didn't ask. You assumed. And now you've destroyed something you didn't understand." The lead officer scoffed. "Look, buddy, maybe if you weren't hanging around like a drifter." "I was dropping off food at the shelter," Keanu said. "Sure you were." And then the officer walked away like it was nothing. Keanu turned and walked to the edge of the sidewalk, staring at what remained. The crowd stayed silent, many pulling out phones now, not to laugh but to record. Something had shifted. Someone had recognized him. Whispers turned to murmurs. "That's Keanu Reeves." A woman approached. She was in her 50s, eyes full of rage and sorrow. "They did this to you?" she asked. "Yes," Keanu said quietly. "They think they can burn down what they don't understand," she muttered. "This isn't the first time." Keanu looked at her. "What do you mean?" And that was the moment the story cracked wide open. The woman told him about the young man last year. His car, too, was set on fire after a run-in with the same officers. He had reported it. Nothing happened. In fact, the report had vanished. Then there was the single mother whose complaint about harassment had been buried, and an immigrant chef whose food truck mysteriously caught fire just weeks after refusing to give free meals to officers. "People here are scared," she said. "But now that they know who you are," Keanu shook his head. "I'm just a man." "No," she said firmly. "You're the voice they might listen to." And that was the moment something changed inside Keanu. He had come here to be alone, to rest, to hide from the noise of fame. But now the silence around him had been pierced by injustice, and he couldn't ignore it. Later that evening, Keanu sat on the floor of his cabin. The scent of pine filled the air, but so did the weight of decisions. He pulled out an old photo of his father. The man had always said, "Use your voice when others can't. Speak when silence becomes cruelty." Keanu whispered, "Then I guess it's time to speak." He didn't call the media. He didn't hire a lawyer. Not yet. Instead, he drove to the local community center the next morning and asked to speak at the weekly town gathering. The woman from the day before, her name was Gloria, stood beside him as he signed his name on the sheet. The clerk behind the desk looked up and froze. "Are you—" "Yes," Keanu said softly. "You want to speak? I want to listen first." Gloria smiled. "Then they'll finally hear." But what Keanu didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that someone inside the department was watching. And they didn't like the idea of truth getting out. That very night a warning would come, and Keanu's mission for justice was about to take a darker turn. Whispers through the pine trees. The rain came slow that night, tapping against the cabin roof like hesitant footsteps. Keanu sat by the fireplace, its amber glow flickering across his tired face. He hadn't moved in hours. The events of the day spun inside his head like an old film reel. The fire, the laughter, the officer's cold dismissal, and Gloria's words that still rang like a bell inside his soul. His body was still, but his mind wasn't. He knew this wasn't just about a motorcycle. Something rotten sat deep beneath this town's clean sidewalks and quiet mornings, and now that he had stepped into it, he couldn't walk away. Outside, the wind shifted, pine needles danced. Then came the knock. Not loud, not urgent, just a slow, steady rhythm that echoed like a question. Keanu stood, heart tightening. He hadn't told anyone where he was staying. He moved to the door cautiously, glancing through the side window. A figure stood under a soaked hoodie, the face hidden in shadow, one hand tucked inside a jacket pocket. Keanu opened the door just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" The figure looked up, eyes scanning him quickly. Young, maybe 25, soaked to the bone, shivering, she pulled her hand out slowly and held up a brown envelope. "They told me not to come," she whispered. "But I saw what they did to your bike, and I know what they'll do next." Keanu opened the door wider. "Come in." She stepped inside, cautiously, her shoes leaving wet marks on the wood. She didn't look like a threat, more like someone used to hiding. Her name was Danny, and what she carried would change everything. Keanu poured her tea and sat across from her at the old table near the window. She slid the envelope toward him. Inside were 5 photographs, each showing what looked like evidence logs, incident reports, and blurry body cam screenshots. One showed the officer who lit the match beside his bike, laughing. Another was a list of destroyed property linked to suspicious individuals, most names circled in red ink. Danny leaned in. "They call it soft cleansing. They target people they don't want in the town, the homeless, immigrants, sometimes just different." Keanu's jaw tightened. "This is real?" She nodded. "My brother worked in records. He found out and tried to go public. 3 days later, he was arrested for assaulting an officer. The footage disappeared. He's still in prison. I kept copies. That's why I'm hiding." Keanu's voice was low, steady. "And now you've risked everything by bringing this to me." Danny shrugged, though her hands trembled. "They won't listen to people like me, but they might listen to you. I saw what you said yesterday. You didn't just lose a bike. You stood up to them." Keanu stared at the photos again. His mind drifted to his own past, to days when he felt powerless, to times when he had everything on the outside, but nothing felt right inside. He remembered watching his own mother cry because of the cruelty of others, and how long it had taken him to find the courage to speak. Now he felt that same fire rising again, but this time it wasn't just his voice, it was everyone's. He looked up. "I'm not going to stay silent." The next day, Keanu returned to the town square, not for groceries, not for peace, but for purpose. The community center was already busy. Children playing tag, elderly men playing checkers on old stone tables, families chatting in low tones. Gloria saw him from across the lot and walked over, eyes curious. "You okay?" she asked. Keanu nodded, but then held up the photos. "I need to talk to everyone." Gloria led him inside, where chairs had been arranged in a circle for the afternoon gathering. Someone recognized him. Then another. Then murmurs started again, but not the excited kind. These whispers were filled with tension, as if they all sensed something serious was about to unfold. Keanu walked to the front and gently tapped a spoon against a glass. The room quieted. He spoke calmly, voice carrying not because it was loud but because it was real. "Yesterday, something of mine was destroyed, and I could have left it at that. Walked away. But then I found out. It wasn't just me. It's been happening to others for years, and it's time that stopped." He held up one of the photographs. "This was taken the moment my motorcycle was set on fire, and the man who did it is still working at the department. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. I've seen too many people afraid to speak, too many silenced by fear. But fear only wins when we let it." A man in the back stood. He was old, with a long gray beard and a limp in his right leg. "My grandson was arrested for something he didn't do. He spent a year in county. The charges were dropped, but they ruined his name." Then a woman spoke up. "My food truck was burned last winter. I never reported it. I knew nothing would happen." Gloria stood next. "They drove my niece out of town. She was a social worker. Too loud, they said. Too nosy. She just wanted kids to be safe." The stories poured out like a broken dam. Keanu didn't interrupt. He just listened. And when it was quiet again, he looked around and said, "This isn't just a town meeting. This is the beginning of something bigger. We won't let this fade. Not again." He offered to help organize the testimonies to get legal aid involved. And that night back at the cabin, he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, an old friend who now worked in investigative journalism. "I need you to come here," Keanu said. "What's this about?" the voice replied. "A town trying to bury the truth, and a fire that woke it up." But just as he hung up the phone, headlights flashed across his window. Too slow, too deliberate. He walked to the door and saw 3 police cruisers idling at the edge of his driveway. No sirens. No words. Just waiting. A silent warning. Danny, who had fallen asleep on the couch, stirred. "They're here," she whispered. Keanu turned off the lights and whispered back, "We're not afraid." But deep down he knew. This was no longer about one bike. This was war. Not with fists or weapons, but with voices. With truth. And those who feared it were already circling. The envelope of betrayal, the morning light came thin and slow through the tall pines, as if the sky itself was reluctant to shine over what had happened in the night. The police cruisers were gone. Not a single tire mark remained on the gravel. But Keanu knew better. Sometimes silence wasn't peace. Sometimes it was a trap waiting to tighten. The scent of burned wood still lingered in the back of his mind, a ghost of smoke that wouldn't leave him. He had slept lightly, every creak of the cabin stirring him, every rustle outside making him reach for the flashlight beside the bed. But dawn brought no rest, only the next step. He stood on the front porch, sipping bitter coffee, watching Danny from a distance as she sat cross-legged on a blanket near the trees. Her hoodie pulled tight. She was sketching something in a notebook, her hands steady now, no longer trembling like before. Maybe it was the firelight from the night they first spoke. Maybe it was the promise she'd heard in his voice at the town hall. Whatever it was, it had begun to strengthen her. As Keanu turned to go back inside, he saw it, a plain envelope on the doorstep, cream-colored, sealed with no markings. No footprints around it. No vehicle tracks. Just there, waiting. He bent down slowly, picked it up and turned it over. It was heavier than expected. Inside he found a folded set of documents and a handwritten note. the words scribbled in nervous, slanted penmanship. I don't know how much longer I can do this. They've already started watching me. But what you're doing, it's the only thing that gives me hope. Enclosed are audio files and security logs from inside the station. You need to understand. This goes much deeper than anyone thinks. The note was signed with only one letter. M. Keanu felt his breath catch. He wasn't alone. Someone inside the police force, someone who had access to protected systems, was risking everything to expose what was buried. He showed the envelope to Danny. They're turning on each other, she said, eyes wide. Or at least one of them is. Keanu nodded. It means they're scared. They spent the next few hours converting the audio files using Danny's old laptop. The first was crackling, full of background noise, but clear enough to make out a tense voice. If that video leaks, it's over. We've kept the lid on this for years. I don't care who he is, you burn the footage. He'll back off like the rest. A second voice responded, lower, angrier. He's not like the rest. He's not from here. He doesn't scare easy. Keanu leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Then another voice spoke. Quieter, almost with regret. We already made one mistake. Now we're making more. The recordings painted a picture more terrifying than he'd imagined. This wasn't just a few rogue officers. It was an entire structure, a culture of intimidation woven deep into the town's institutions, police, council, even the local media. They didn't just silence dissent. They erased it. They didn't just fear exposure. They hunted it. Keanu turned to Danny. We need to move fast. That afternoon, they met Gloria again, this time at a private corner in the community library. Gloria brought someone new, a man named Thomas, soft-spoken, wheelchair-bound, with eyes that had seen too much. He had once been the head of the town's Public Safety Review Board. He told them how his efforts to investigate complaints were blocked at every turn. He tried to alert state officials. They never returned his calls. Eventually, he was reassigned after a mysterious fall that left him paralyzed. They wanted me gone, Tomas said quietly. So I disappeared. But I never stopped watching. He opened a small case on his lap, revealing an old camcorder and a stack of tapes. Everything I recorded. Interviews, testimonies, council meetings they thought no one cared about. It's all here. Keanu felt the weight of the room press in. And now you're giving it to me? Thomas looked at him, unblinking. You're the only one who can carry it now. Back at the cabin, they began uploading the footage. Keanu made a call to his journalist friend again, this time more urgent, more detailed. The man on the other end, named Liam, promised he was boarding a plane that night. But be careful, Liam warned. Once you go public, there's no going back. Keanu already knew that, but he wasn't the same man who rode into town looking for peace. Now he was a voice for those who had been silenced. Every story he heard, every file he read, every trembling hand that passed him a piece of the puzzle, they had all become part of him. But just as the uploads began, the screen blinked, then went black. What happened? Danny asked, panic rising. Keanu tried to reboot the laptop. Nothing. Then a message appeared across the screen in red text. You were warned. He froze. At that same moment, a loud crash came from the back of the cabin, glass shattering. Danny screamed. Keanu rushed to the source and found a rock on the floor surrounded by broken window pane. A note was tied around it. Leave now, or next time it won't be your window. Danny's voice shook behind him. They know we have something. Keanu stared out into the darkening forest. Someone was watching. Maybe more than one. The silence between the trees no longer felt peaceful. It felt hunted. This wasn't a threat anymore. It was a siege. He gathered the files, the recordings, the hard drives, wrapped them in waterproof material, and buried them just outside the cabin in a dry patch beneath a large flat stone. If anything happens to me, he said, you dig this up and go straight to Gloria. Danny nodded, tears in her eyes. That night, Keanu didn't sleep. Neither did she. They took shifts, listening for movement, their flashlights scanning the woods. Every twig crack felt louder. Every gust of wind felt closer. When the morning finally came, it brought something unexpected. A black SUV pulled up quietly to the edge of the driveway. A man stepped out. Not police, not press. He was dressed in gray, eyes calm, wearing an identification badge tucked into his coat. He raised a hand slowly. "Mr. Reeves," he said. "My name is Agent Carter. I'm with the Department of Justice." Keanu stared at him. "How did you find me?" "Let's just say," Carter replied, "someone on the inside isn't the only one watching." Keanu stepped forward, heart pounding. "So what happens now?" Carter looked over his shoulder at the trees. "Now? Now we clean house." But Keanu could feel it in his gut. This wasn't the end. It was just the first crack in a dam that, when broken, would unleash a storm unlike anything this town had ever seen. The trap inside the truth. The federal agent's presence didn't bring relief. It brought tension. It felt like holding a lit match in a dry forest. Agent Carter stood firm, calm, but everything about him hinted at urgency. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't smile. Instead, he handed Keanu a secure black case with a key code lock. "You're going to Washington," Carter said. Keanu blinked. "Washington? You're going to testify, but not in court. Not yet. There's a closed-door session with federal oversight. The files you've gathered, the testimonies, this goes beyond just one town. If what you have connects to what we've been tracking, we may be looking at a multi-state cover-up involving law enforcement and local officials." Keanu exchanged a look with Danny, who had just stepped out from the cabin, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "You're not safe here anymore," Carter continued. "We need to move now." Quietly. Keanu glanced back at the trees, at the cabin that had sheltered him and witnessed the unraveling of so much darkness. He didn't want to leave it behind. Not unfinished, not unprotected. But something in Carter's voice, something in his eyes, said they didn't have a choice. Before they left, Keanu retrieved the buried files. The early morning sun was rising over the pines as he wiped off the dirt and handed the sealed package to the agent. "This has everything," Keanu said. Carter nodded. "Let's hope it's enough." The drive out of town was quiet, the SUV humming across winding roads, its tinted windows hiding them from view. Danny sat beside Keanu, gripping the edge of her seat, her eyes darting between the passing trees like she expected something or someone to leap from the shadows. The fear wasn't paranoia anymore, it was learned, earned. "Do you trust him?" she asked, voice low. "I don't trust anyone," Keanu said. "But I trust the truth. And that's what we're carrying." By the time they reached the airstrip, the sky had turned pale blue. A small government jet sat waiting, engines already warmed. Carter escorted them aboard, locking the case in a metal cabinet before sitting across from them. "This meeting won't be on record," he said. "But it's your chance to get this into the right hands. They'll listen to you." "They don't know me," Keanu said. "No," Carter replied, "but they know what silence costs. And right now, you're the loudest voice we've got." The plane lifted, cutting through clouds. Keanu leaned back in his seat, exhausted, but focused. He had seen so many scripts in his life, so many roles, but none of them had ever felt like this. This wasn't fiction. This was every real moment that had ever been buried, dragged into light one breath at a time. But 20 minutes into the flight, the calm cracked. A buzz came from Carter's phone. He stared at the screen, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Keanu asked. Carter turned the screen toward him. A message flashed across it, red background, bold white letters, "Security breach. Destination compromised before anyone could speak." The plane jolted sharply. The cabin lights flickered. Danny gripped her seat, knuckles white. Keanu stood, steadying himself. "What's happening?" Carter rushed to the cockpit, disappearing behind the reinforced door. Moments later, he returned, his expression dark. "Someone leaked our route. There's a fake checkpoint ahead, armed." This wasn't supposed to happen. Keanu stared at him. You're saying someone inside your own agency? Carter nodded grimly. We've been infiltrated. We've got to land early. There's an alternate airfield about 40 miles out. I've called for a secondary team to meet us there. But from the moment we touch down, we're targets. Keanu sat back down slowly, mind spinning. Danny looked at him, wide-eyed. They're going to try and stop you before you even speak. He nodded. Then we don't stop moving. The landing was rough. The plane touched down hard, tires screeching across cracked asphalt in the middle of nowhere. The airfield was empty, no tower, no lights, just open land and an old hangar. They moved fast, Carter leading the way toward a blacked-out van waiting near the runway. But as they approached, Keanu stopped. Wait, he said. Carter turned. What? How do you know that's our ride? Carter froze. The van's back, door slid open. A man stepped out holding a rifle dressed in tactical gear, but not marked. Keanu didn't flinch. He took one step forward. Who are you? The man raised the gun halfway, not pointing but close. That's not your concern. Keanu's eyes narrowed. Then you don't work for the Doge. A sudden whistle cut through the air, and from the hangar came movement, 3 more armed figures emerging fast. Keanu grabbed Danny's hand. Run! They darted to the side, diving behind an old generator box as bullets ripped through the dirt beside them. Carter fired back, ducking behind the wing of the jet. Chaos erupted. Metal clanging, shouts, smoke. This wasn't an arrest. This was an execution attempt. Keanu reached into the case Carter had handed him earlier, the one with the files. It was still intact, still locked, and deep inside, the truth they were trying to bury. He turned to Danny, breathing hard. You have to take this if something happens to me. No, she whispered, shaking her head. We started this together. They crawled toward the far fence, keeping low as gunfire continued. Behind them, Carter was hit, shoulder wound, but still returning fire, shouting commands into his earpiece. Then through the smoke, a second van appeared. This one marked clearly. Real agents, real backup. The firefight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When the dust settled, 3 of the fake officers were down. 1 fled. And Carter, though, wounded, walked over to Keanu with blood on his sleeve. They almost had you, he said. Keanu stared at the fallen attackers. They're willing to kill to protect the lie. Carter nodded. And now that lie is falling apart. That night, instead of a formal building in Washington, they were taken to a secure facility underground. Clean, quiet, lit by white lights and guarded by men who asked no questions. Keanu sat in a cold room, facing 6 people in suits, each with a different badge, none with a smile. They asked him to speak. He told them everything. The fire, the officer's laugh, the envelope from the informant, Danny's brother, Thomas's tapes, the voices on the recordings, the trap on the plane, and, finally, he placed the sealed black case on the table. This, he said, is what your silence allowed. It ends now. When he finished, the room was dead silent. Then one of the men leaned forward. You understand? He said carefully. What this means? Keanu nodded. It means, if you walk out of here and do nothing, it happens again, somewhere else, to someone else. But even as the officials deliberated behind closed doors, Keanu knew. The people who wanted the truth, hidden, hadn't stopped. And the next attack wouldn't come with bullets. It would come with lies. When truth bleeds on television. 3 days later, the sun rose over the capital city, washing the buildings in soft gold. But inside KeanuReeves' temporary, safe house, the light didn't bring calm. It brought dread. The air was stiff with waiting. Waiting for word from the committee, waiting for a call from Carter, waiting for anything that might signal the beginning of justice. But all they got was a knock on the door. Then a television flickering on in the corner of the room with breaking headlines that made Danny drop her coffee. Keanu Reeves named in federal probe. Actor linked to conspiracy and domestic disruption. Campaign. Keanu stared at the screen, frozen as the anchor's voice pierced the room like ice. Sources close to law enforcement say the actor, while initially believed to be a whistleblower, may have fabricated documents in an effort to discredit local authorities. This comes days after an alleged violent standoff at a remote airstrip, involving unidentified agents and stolen federal property. The footage cut to a blurred clip of the firefight, smoke, shouting, Keanu crouched behind cover, his face barely visible. Then to an older video, Keanu walking through the burned wreckage of his motorcycle. And finally, a doctored image, his face next to bold red text that read, "Celebrity vigilante or dangerous fraud." Danny covered her mouth. They flipped it. They actually flipped the story. Keanu's voice was calm, but it held a dark edge. They knew what was coming. They had to discredit it before it reached the public. The network paraded expert after expert, some claiming Keanu had radicalized locals, others suggesting he was mentally unstable following years of isolation. It wasn't just a smear campaign. It was an orchestrated hit on his credibility, crafted with surgical precision and nationwide reach. A knock sounded again. Carter burst in moments later, looking exhausted, his arm still in a sling. "They got to the press before we could," he said. "We've traced the leak. Came from someone inside the Justice Department. The files you gave me, the originals are safe, but now the public thinks you're a liar." Keanu didn't flinch. "Then we show them what truth actually looks like." "How?" Danny asked. "They've already decided who you are." Keanu stood, grabbed the case again and pulled out something he hadn't yet used. An old flash drive Tomas had handed him separately. It contained hours of community testimonies, raw and emotional, none of it filtered or edited. Some had faces, blurred. Others were in shadow. But the voices? They were real. Real fear. Real pain. Real stories of injustice that no spin could erase. "We don't fight this with lawyers or headlines," Keanu said. "We fight it with people." He called Liam, the journalist who had promised to fly in earlier. This time, Keanu gave him everything: raw footage, files, names, timelines, and one condition. "I don't want you to edit it," Keanu said. "Don't add drama, don't put it through a filter, just show them. Show the world what really happened." Liam hesitated. "They're going to try and stop this, you know. Then we make sure it's too fast to catch." Keanu and Danny spent the next 48 hours building a live broadcast plan. Not through major networks, they were compromised. Not through hidden corners of the internet, too easy to dismiss. Instead, they contacted a dozen grassroots journalists, independent platforms, social justice organizations, and civilian live streamers. They all agreed on one thing: simultaneous release. One truth. Many voices. One unstoppable moment. They called it the burned truth. The night before the broadcast, Keanu sat alone on the balcony of the safe house. The city lights blinked below. The wind tugged at his hoodie. He closed his eyes and thought about the first fire. The match, the officer's laugh, the silence of the crowd, and how that silence was gone now, burned away by truth. The next day, as the clock struck noon, the footage went live, across phones, tablets, laptops, TVs, from cafes in Los Angeles to schools in Ohio, from homes in Chicago to markets in Georgia. Millions of people watched as the raw truth unfolded. The video began with Keanu's quiet voice. "I never thought I'd be the one to tell this story. But silence is a choice, and I choose not to stay quiet." It cut to Gloria, then to Thomas in his wheelchair, then to Danny's brother, speaking from behind glass in a prison phone booth, then to the officer's body cam footage, the match, the fire, the laughter, then to the files from the anonymous whistleblower. Lists of covered-up crimes, falsified arrest records, destroyed evidence logs. No narration. No music. Just reality, and the world reacted. Within hours, the burned truth trended in 30 countries. Celebrities, activists, lawyers, and ordinary people flooded the internet with demands for justice. Street protests broke out near the town's police station. National newspapers reversed course, now reporting on the original evidence in full. The same anchors who once called him unstable now called him a symbol of civilian resistance. But not everyone celebrated. That night, someone tried to break into the safe house. Security cameras caught a masked man cutting power to the fence before being stopped by guards. His ID, forged. His weapon, unmarked. His intent, lethal. Carter called Keanu into a room afterward, shutting the door behind them. "You've become more than a threat now," he said. "You're a rally point, and people like you, they don't get silenced, they get hunted." Keanu didn't blink. "Then let them come." And come they did, not with guns, but with subpoenas. The next morning, Keanu received a court order demanding he appear before a state criminal inquiry. The charges: obstruction, unlawful access of police data, and defamation of officers. Danny read the document aloud. "They're trying to bury you under legal weight." Keanu took it gently, folded it, and put it in his jacket pocket. "They can put my name on every paper they want," he said, "but they can't erase those voices." And just as he said it, Gloria burst into the room, breathless, holding a phone. "They're calling a new witness to the stand," she said. "Someone from the inside. Someone no one expected." Keanu took the phone, placed it to his ear, and a quiet voice spoke. "It's me. I'm ready. I'm Officer Mendez, and I'm going to testify." Danny's eyes widened. He was one of them. Keanu nodded. Not anymore. For the first time, the wall of silence was cracking from the inside, and the people who had laughed as they burned his motorcycle had no idea that the next fire would consume everything they built. The ashes of silence. The courthouse steps were swarming by dawn. Cameras pointed like rifles. People pressed against barricades, holding handwritten signs that read things like, "Truth can't be silenced, we believe you, and burn lies, not justice." Helicopters circled above as media vans lined the street in a tight phalanx. But inside the tall gray building, behind locked glass and bulletproof doors, sat something even more explosive than the crowd. A single man, sitting with his hands folded, waiting for his name to be called. Officer Javier Mendez had not slept the night before. He had sent a single message to Keanu: "I'm ready," and hadn't looked back. Once celebrated as a model cop, he had risen through the ranks with speed and precision. But that climb had come at a cost. He had watched his own integrity eroded little by little as corruption became currency. For years he kept silent. But when he saw the footage of Keanu Reeves's motorcycle burning while other officers laughed, something inside him broke. Keanu watched from a back corner of the hearing chamber, disguised under a baseball cap, his expression unreadable. Danny sat beside him, gripping a notepad, her face pale but her eyes sharp. On the opposite side of the room sat representatives from the Justice Department, state law enforcement, and several high-profile defense attorneys. This wasn't just a court hearing. It was a reckoning. Mendez was called to the stand. His voice shook at first, but then it found its footing. He told them everything: the unspoken culture, the cleansing lists, the annual meetings disguised as strategy briefings, where supervisors handed out coded names of individuals to target. He spoke of bonus incentives that rewarded officers not for protection but for compliance, turning a blind eye to harassment, falsifying reports, suppressing investigations. But then, he dropped the hammer. "This wasn't local," Mendez said, looking each official in the eye. "It didn't stop at our town. This was sanctioned, quietly but knowingly, by a senior liaison in the Department of Justice." The room stiffened. "Name," one official demanded. Mendez reached into his inner coat pocket and slid a document across the table. It was a sworn affidavit, signed 2 weeks earlier, sealed until this moment. Inside were emails, voice memos, travel logs. The final page had one name: Harold Renner, Assistant Deputy of Internal Affairs. The air in the courtroom snapped like dry branches underfoot. "He visited our precinct 3 times, Mendez said. "He told us, and I quote, 'Clean neighborhoods, make better news, keep the streets quiet by any means necessary.'" A gasp rippled through the crowd. One of the justices stood up. "Are you aware that what you're alleging is a direct breach of Federal Code 242, And classifies as conspiracy under Title 18? Mendez nodded. I'm not just aware. I've lived it. For the first time, Keanu leaned forward. Renner was the same name listed on the internal memo Carter had received, back when their flight was compromised. Now it all connected. The failed ambush, the forged news story, even the courthouse delays. Renner wasn't just trying to protect a department. He was protecting himself. And the fire that began on a cracked sidewalk in a small town had finally reached the highest floors of power. As Mendez stepped down from the stand, the room erupted. Reporters ran to their phones. Government officials scrambled to draft immediate actions. But Keanu remained still. He knew better. This wasn't victory. This was exposure. And when people like Renner get exposed, they don't go quietly. He was right. Within hours of the hearing, a press conference was called. The DOJ officially suspended Renner pending investigation. His office was raided, but he was nowhere to be found. Gloria called Keanu late that night. He's running. How long do we have? Keanu asked. Not long, she said. And he's not going alone. By morning, Keanu was already en route with Carter, Danny, and Mendez in a blacked-out SUV heading to a safe location in Virginia. The files had been duplicated, encrypted, and shared with multiple outlets. But the real threat wasn't deletion, it was retaliation. As they drove, Danny turned to Keanu. Do you regret coming here? Keanu looked out the window, watching the trees blur past. No, he said after a long silence. I regret how many years I stayed quiet. I regret thinking peace meant avoiding conflict. But now, I know peace means standing in front of the fire and saying, you don't get to burn people anymore. Suddenly, Carter slammed the brakes. An unmarked car had cut them off on the highway. Before anyone could react, men in tactical gear stepped out. Guns. Drawn, Keanu grabbed Danny and Mendez. Down. But then, sirens. A dozen black vehicles surrounded them in seconds. Real federal agents poured out, weapons raised, ordering the attackers to drop their arms. Chaos turned into control within minutes. The imposters were arrested. Inside their vehicle, a burner phone with Renner's number on it. He had tried one last time. He had failed. 1 week later, Keanu stood on the steps of the same courthouse, this time, not in disguise, not as a man hiding, but as a voice that had become something larger than himself. He stepped to the mic, looked into a sea of cameras and people and said, I'm not a hero. I didn't set out to change anything, but when you see injustice and you turn away from it, you're helping it grow. We stopped that cycle, not with force, not with fame, but with truth. And if it can happen in one town, it can happen in any. So don't wait for someone else. Be the match, not to burn, but to light. The crowd went silent. Then it erupted. And in that moment, among the noise and light and movement, Danny whispered, they burned your bike thinking it would scare you away. But all they did was wake the world. Keanu smiled. Let them keep their ashes. We've got something stronger now. Truth.